Welcome to the Edge of Heresy podcast. I am your host, Clifton Dugosh.
And I'm Jamie Given.
Today, we are going to be going over a little bit of contract law as we start to work our way into the salvation topic. Jamie, I believe you have some notes to get us started.
Yep. So, except my notes went away. They disappeared on me.
Okay.
I think last time we ended with the question, do we sin because we're sinners, or are we sinners because we sin?
An excellent question.
It is. It's been a topic that's been discussed over hundreds and hundreds of years. And I'm not going to answer that today. Isn't that wonderful? But I think my understanding of what happened in the Garden of Eden as I was growing up was super limited. Like I thought it was about sin, right? And that was it. Like, man sinned. Now you're sunk, dude. God's got to come in and rescue you and save the day, right? And I thought it was all about that.
Yeah. So what changed?
Well, I've got kids, right?
Yes.
And as I examined the way I raised my own kids, and I realized there's a lot of power in forgiveness. Like, for example, I was going to save this story for later, but I think we'll go into that story. Like, when my son was a young teenager, I fell into this incredible opportunity. God blessed me. Some guy didn't like his Camaro anymore, and he sold it to me for like $300 or $400. It was ridiculous.
Nice.
It was firing on most of its 6 cylinders. It had the back window was shattered out, and the rag top was ratty, and a couple other things. No big deal. But for $400, I mean, like, it's crazy. I think it was only $200 he sold it to before, right? So over time, a little bit of effort, I made it better. My father-in-law used to work for NAPA Napa, right? And he was a maintenance guy. He loved fixing stuff. He got a hold of the car for a while, and a couple months during the summer, he had bored out some of the cylinders. There was a rod that had gotten shoved up inside the piston. He cleared all that out, and it was firing on all 6 cylinders now, and it was a thing of beauty. It was wonderful. While I was waiting to earn the money to purchase a whole new rag top for it, I had multiple solutions. I took one of those very clear shower curtains and sewed it into the back so that I could have a back window, right? We had finally gotten it up and running, and it was wonderful. And my son borrowed it one night to go pick up his friend from work. And he did much more than pick up his friend from work. They decided this is an exciting vehicle. Let's go drive it down an exciting road.
Ooh.
He wasn't super experienced with a car, so I think what happened is he went too wide in a corner. It went into some gravel. No big deal. He brought it back onto the road, but when he came on too fast, he wasn't prepared for how much extra grip it would suddenly have. He flipped the car over on top. It's a rag top, remember? No hard roof. And if I showed you the pictures, everyone is like, how did anyone survive this wreck? Right?
Wow.
And it was flattened. They should have died. But they had a couple scratches on their arms. That was it, where they busted the windows out so they could climb out. Like, I didn't take my son to court or anything. He's my son.
Yeah.
I forgave him. And most of the time I forget that even happened. I brought it back up when we were talking about this subject. But most of the time I don't even think about it. Right?
Yeah.
It truly is an instance of forgive and forget. So if my son listens to this, I don't want him to think I've never forgotten. I forget about it all the time. I just remembered it. But like, so why doesn't God just like, I forgive you? No big deal. All done. Settled. I do that with my kids, right?
Yeah.
All of my life. Your parents probably forgave you for stuff. I forgive you. Just don't do it again.
Yeah. Usually came with a whooping.
So I started going back and thinking, like, there has to be more to this story than just Adam and Eve sinned because God could have just forgiven them.
Yeah.
So I'm like, what else took place? Like, I think a lot more happened in the Garden of Eden than just mankind got sold into sin, right? So I don't think I sin because a long time ago, Adam sinned. And now we're all doomed to sin. So I think it goes more to that. And as I've been studying through, and listening to the Bema Discipleship podcast and stuff like that, I've learned a lot about Hebrew cultures. I've learned a lot about what it means to be the Bechor. I don't know if I said that right. The Bechor, basically the leader of the family, right? That firstborn. Adam was the firstborn of all mankind, right?
Yeah.
So he kind of represented us. I think it goes far more than just a representative. I learned all these things as a kid, right? So I'm like, what is that missing piece, right? And as I started thinking about it, I think in our small group last year, we started talking about sin. Like, we did a lot of sin stuff. And I realized some key components, which we'll talk about later, but not right now, that made me think about all this stuff, right?
Yeah.
And there's an interesting book called, an audiobook, I listened to an audiobook called The Authority of the Believer, right? Which I got introduced to that stuff about a decade or so ago. So in Hebrew culture, they talk a lot about servants. We think of them as slaves, but it's not really slavery the way you and I think of slavery.
Yeah.
Like America had its own experiment with slavery, and it was wretched. It was horrible. There was so much wrong done.
Yes.
But it's when we read about slavery in the Bible, this bond servants or servants, it's not really the same. Like, if I was Moses, Abraham had lots and lots of servants, right?
Yeah.
And although they had little freedoms on their own as servants, they didn't have as many rights, but like, they were super well taken care of, right?
Yeah.
And if you think about it, we still live in that kind of thing. Back in those days, you either had cattle, you were a merchant, or you were a craftsman of some kind. But they hadn't had the Industrial Revolution yet, right? So there weren't actually very many like employees. Like,
well, you even reminded me of, like, when it talks about Solomon and I forget her name, that came up from like Ethiopia or something.
Yeah.
She comments on how well he takes care of the servants.
Right.
And it's like, they aren't just your servants. These people love you because of the way you're treating them. And that was part of the thing that, like, she marveled at, is like, not only is he wise, but there's proof of it all around him in the way he's treating everyone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very interesting.
They had some weird, crazy laws in Exodus about like servants. If you hit your servant in the eye and your servant loses his sight and he loses his eyes, he sets free because of his eye. That's what it says. You set him free because of the eyes. That's the way it was, right? There's other laws that says you cannot steal a man and sell him, right? Like, or if you steal a man and you sell him, that's a crime. Or if you steal a man and he's found in your possession, that's a crime, right? Which is how we were introduced to slavery. We were buying stolen people. That's not how servants were back then, right? Like, I would sell myself into servitude because I needed to get myself out of some debts, and I didn't have anything that I could trade with other than the fact that I can cut wood and fetch water, right? Get that from I don't know, Judges, maybe, or Joshua, those people that came to Israel and they became woodcutters and water gatherers, right? That was just out of nowhere. But like that's what you would do if you didn't have any skills that your father passed down to you. You worked for somebody. That was called servitude, right? But they had some really interesting laws that go along with that. Tons of interesting laws, like if you come into my service and you have a wife, when you're done with your service, right? Like say it's the year of Jubilee, or you could only serve for me for 7 years anyway. So even if it wasn't the year of Jubilee yet, if you'd done your 7 years, you're done. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Of course, Jubilee was every 7 years anyways. I don't know how the math would work on that. But anyway, so there were lots of weird rules. But if you became my servant, and then I gave you one of my other servants as a wife, and she bared you children, those weren't your children, they were mine, right? And when you left, when you served your time and you were done, you left, I kept the kids. Because I know this sounds crass and it sounds hateful, but it's like cattle, right? But we don't treat humans like cattle, and they didn't either. But some of the rules would tend to make people think that that's how it was, right?
Mm.
There's some really interesting rules about how good you better treat your cattle too. But anyway, but that's what we'd look at when we look at the Garden of Eden. Because when Adam and Eve sinned, they did far more than just eat a piece of fruit that God didn't want them to eat, right?
Yeah.
What they really did is they bought into a different system. Here's God. I make man. I make woman. I give them this world to dominate, right?
All authority.
All authority. And there's a blessing. We talked about the blessing. We talked about the responsibilities. All of these things that man is supposed to do, that God has empowered man to do, and God has blessed man to do, right? He gave him everything he needed to do it. He gave him a blessing so that if he obeyed and he did it, he would be blessed with that, right?
Yes.
And he sent him off to do a task, and he gave him everything he needed to accomplish that task, which includes the authority, right?
Yes.
Now here comes this other guy who says, he sells it like, what could be the harm? It's a piece of fruit, right?
You shall not surely die.
You shall not surely die. But they didn't read the small print, right? The fine print in that contract was really saying you can do it God's way, or you can do things your way, which was really his way. His way is doing things your way, right? So it sounds appealing.
So be like me and do things my way.
Yes. But
which is actually your way too.
You can't sell things like do things my way, right?
Yeah.
Because that's too easy. Like he's a liar. He's a deceiver, right? That's his game, right? So they didn't read the small print. They didn't know. But what they did is they changed masters. Right? We read in Revelations. Wow. We read in Romans 6 where it says, whoever you choose to obey, that's your master, right? To whom you choose to serve, his servants you are. It's a crazy wording. You know, if anybody wants to read it, they can read it if they don't know it. But it's there, Romans 6:16. I know I shouldn't give people verses. It makes them lazy. So we can cut that out and they can be not lazy and they can go find it themselves. But that's the rules, right? Whoever you choose to serve, you're their servant, right?
Yes.
And so man said, I serve God. Oh, no, wait, this sounds like a better way. I serve Satan, right? And we see that children that are born into that mastery, into that world, all automatically are born into being slaves to Satan, right? Because of those laws about ownership, right? And we see that. We hadn't really discussed this, but we see that, right? When you think of Cain and Abel, Cain was the firstborn, right?
Yep.
The first child born a slave to a new world, right? And when we see the story of Cain and Abel, we don't see Satan in that story like we did in Adam and Eve and the fruit and the serpent. We don't see that interaction, but he's following his master, which is do things your way, right?
Yes.
Right? And we see what happens there. It seems like Abel was trying to live God's way in Satan's world, and it cost him his life. But
yeah,
I have an interesting note here that doesn't really go into anything we're talking about, but I thought it was interesting, the story of Esau. He sold his birthright for food. Right?
Basically kind of what happened. Not basically kind of. That's exactly what happened.
Exactly what happened.
It's like, here's your birthright. I'm going to trade it for what we believe to be an apple.
Oh, an apple. It's a fruit, but we have no idea. I'm sure it's not an apple because that tree is not around anymore. It's fun to say. So I think that story of Esau and Jacob is kind of a reminder about the fact that we've been sold. Our birthright over and over and over again has been sold.
Well, and that goes into, like you said, the question of why can't God just forgive us? Like if it was just a forgiveness thing, it's like, okay, here's a bit of accountability, boundaries, and here's your consequence, but I forgive you. But it's like, no, you've switched kingdoms.
Right.
But that choice means that you are no longer like part of my kingdom. And that, like you said, gives a lot more significance to what Jesus did. It's like, okay, this is like we talked about contract law.
Contract law. There's an outside third party.
Yes.
That's why. There's an outside third party. When my son wrecked the car, there was no outside third party. Well, there was the insurance, but the insurance paid for it. It's like, whatever, your car, your loss, right? But there was no outside third party. Like it wasn't someone who stole my car, right?
Yeah.
There wasn't any law enforcement saying, hey, there's still some payments that need to be made to this car. Somebody has to make these payments. All this stuff. There was nothing outside. It was just a two-person exchange. Hey, I forgive you. No big deal, right? Done and done. But with Adam and Eve, there was an outside third party. Like, these are mine now, and I'm not selling them back so easily. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
That's right. So there's that. There's also the case that God is just and God is holy, right? God, for his own holiness, can probably forgive, but also in some ways, I think his holiness demands that he do more than just forgive. Like there needs to be a cost.
Yes. Love without boundaries isn't really love. And I like that Genesis story because it's basically that accountability, boundaries, and consequences. That is the revolving theme from beginning to end. And it is a description of love the way God defined it to be.
Yeah.
And so, yes, there has to be accountability, boundaries, and consequences. And because of that, mercy has a far greater meaning, I think.
Right. Yes. And I do. I think that both justice and mercy needed to be satisfied. Right? So God could forgive and mercy would be satisfied. Or God could judge and judgment would be satisfied, but mercy would not. So God created a way for both justice and mercy to be satisfied and to satisfy the outside third party, right?
The accuser.
The accuser. Yes. And we talked about this, and I think like when I studied this, man, it changed the way I thought. Like there's so many religions that have a very oppressive concept of who God is. And Christianity also, like modern Christianity, can sometimes in some sects of it, what do you call it? I don't know, some denominations. That's the D word I was looking for. Some denominations have very oppressive views of God and his rules, right? And it's a whole bunch of thou shalt nots, and that's all it is, right? But this really helped me out a lot. When I realized that God is the creator of the world, is the judge, and he has every right to judge what his creation did, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he can choose forgiveness or he can choose judgment, right? He can choose punishment or he can choose discipline. These are different. And we can talk about discipline later because discipline leads to not being judged. It's fantastic. We should love discipline, right?
Amen.
But he has the right. He slams down that gavel, right? He slams that gavel down and he can say guilty or not guilty. And he can also say, and here's the price of your punishment, right?
Mm-hmm.
When it's guilty, right? He has that. What his role isn't is he's not an accuser. Like God does not drag me to a bench and throw me down in front of it and sit down back behind his little thing and say, defend yourself. You've done right. He's not my accuser. God doesn't accuse me of anything, like ever, right? That's what Satan does. Satan is the accuser.
Well, that's cool. What just came to mind is the woman caught in adultery brought before Jesus, where he says, "Let he who is without sin cast the first stone."
Yeah.
It's like, hey, this is foreshadowing.
Yeah.
Because you have an accuser who has brought you to the throne room of the Father and laid your accusations.
It's crazy how they brought her there to trap him. But in an unintentional way, they were showing everybody that they thought he had the authority to judge her. I love that you brought that up. That's awesome.
And he did. And his choice was mercy.
Yes, his choice was mercy. He didn't say not guilty. He just says,
go and sin no more.
Yeah. He told them quit accusing until you're clean. Right? Mm-hmm. That's amazing. Absolutely. And it's so freeing. Like it's a release to know that even though God is my judge and he will judge me in the judgment seat, right? He's not the one accusing me because, wow, I'd be in trouble. He's not, because of the role of loving father, right? My judge is also a loving father who has boundaries and rules, yes, and consequences, but loving, right? My accuser is not loving. No. My accuser just wants sin and death, right? He comes to steal, kill, and destroy.
Yeah, well, I think we've talked about this before, but for our viewers' sake, like we've talked about Satan and can he be forgiven? Would he want to be forgiven? But at the same time, we're out here. We made this because of Adam. Adam made the same choice that Satan did, and later on down the line, we have the opportunity to be forgiven because of Jesus's willingness to come and satisfy justice and mercy for our sake. whereas Satan doesn't have that.
Yeah.
So you can understand the bitterness from that perspective.
Yep. So he has no mercy. He has only judgment, no mercy.
Correct.
Yeah. But he has, well, he had all the cards. Like he had all the aces. He was in control because the guy who was in control gave it to him. He says, I want to follow someone different. Right?
Yeah.
And he wasn't given the opportunity to not follow. I think they did. They went back to God. But until Christ, I think it's all temporary. We didn't plan on talking about this, but God has always chosen a people that have followed him, despite the fact that they live in a world that doesn't belong to them, and that didn't belong to God anymore, and didn't belong to his creation anymore. It belonged to his foe, right?
Yes.
But he did always still have followers. There were always people that chose righteousness and life over sin and death, right? So all the way through. And I mean, we know them: Abraham, Moses, all these.
Elijah or Elisha, where I think it's Elijah, where he's like, God, I'm the only one left who serves you. And he's like, calm down.
He's like, nope.
I have 7,000 people who have not bent the knee to Baal,
Yeah.
who will serve me. It's like, there was always a remnant.
That's right.
But it's interesting for me, I think, to think about it. Like Jesus came preaching a kingdom. So looking at it from that, also the perspective of two kingdoms. Now we've got God's kingdom that we basically, like you said, we sold the keys to the kingdom to Satan for a piece of fruit, and justice and mercy needed to be dealt with, and that's what Jesus came and basically snatched those keys back from Satan on our behalf.
Right. Didn't snatch him back.
Fair enough.
Paid full price.
Yeah.
Wording.
It is important,
That's
though.
one of the things that gets me. Like, I'm not going to rant on that today, but those things make me almost furious when people talk about Jesus cheated the grave and he robbed the grave, he cheated death, he stole the keys to hell, and like, oh man, that stuff makes me mad. Like he paid the full price. And I am not going to rant. I am instead going to go back to the fact that what Adam gave up was everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we are born in a world of sin. And so we do tend towards sin. And a lot of people like we encourage participation, right? If you've got questions, ask them. If you find a verse that you think does make me wrong, let us know, right? I don't put a lot of verses in this because I want people to seek, right? And knock. I want people to own it. I don't want people to borrow it. Like I want them to own it. But I got a bunch of verses here. Like there's a whole bunch of verses for this concept. Sorry, scrolling down through my notes. 2 Corinthians 4:4. Satan is referred to as the god of this world, right? Mm-hmm. There's other verses. I don't even know. Ephesians 2, Ephesians 6, where he's talked about the god of this present age, right? So Scripture doesn't hide the fact that he is now in charge, or he was now in charge, right? during Christ's presence on earth, all that had shifted. But up until that time, Satan was the god of this world, the principalities and the power of the air, right? We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers, right? It doesn't hide the fact that Satan's in charge. This is his world. These are his people. These are his, right? As a matter of fact, when Jesus was tempted in the desert, and the third temptation, which should have been the most powerful temptation, right? And it was. Trust me, it was, right? But we read it. We don't think it's a big deal. But he takes him up to this high tower, remember? And he looks out at the cities of the world. He says, if you'll just bow and kneel to me, I will give you all of this. If he didn't own all of this, where's the bribery there? Where's the, right?
Mm-hmm.
Jesus couldn't say, you don't own that stuff anyway. So even 40 days without food, he knows better than that. But no, the reason why it was legit is because he did own it. And Jesus was there to get it back. And Satan was offering the easy route. He was offering him the easy route. You want all this back? I'll give it to you right now. We'll sign the documents right now. All yours. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
But we think that it wasn't much of a threat, but it was powerful. Like that had to be tempting. That had to be tempting. I'm here to get all this back.
Sure it was, because later on in the Gethsemane, when he's praying, like, Lord, if there's any other way, take this cup from me. It's like, that was the cup.
Yeah.
It's like, that was the way. It wouldn't have worked,
because
it would have been God's will, but
right.
That was, like you say, it was the devil will always tempt you first with the counterfeit.
Right. I mean, it wouldn't have worked, because then what he would have been doing? He would
have switched sides.
The second Adam now becomes the first Adam all over again. No, but he becomes the second Adam. We weren't going to get into this. We'll get into this when we talk about salvation, stuff and the work that Christ did on the cross. We'll talk about all that kind of stuff. That's the second half of this. We're already about a half an hour into this, so I don't want to divert into something that's going to take another whole half hour. But that story, that temptation, is legit, because this was his, right? So when Jesus died on the cross, he did much more than just be a propitiation for our sins, an atonement. That atonement talks about buying back. We hear the word redeemed. It means to purchase back, right?
Mm-hmm.
God, through Jesus, paid the price that was required to get all of mankind back, right? Just, it's amazing. And we'll talk about that. And we're going into salvation next anyway.
Yeah.
But I want people to understand that there's plenty of evidence, the fact that Adam sold humanity into servitude to Satan.
Well, and symbolically, I can't take credit, and I don't know who to give credit to, but what I've heard is, and I love this symbology of it, is that just like Adam picked the fruit from the tree, Jesus being hung on it was the act of him putting it back.
That's some pretty good symbology.
That's pretty cool.
Absolutely.
But I was also thinking of where to go from here, and I was thinking more along the lines of the kingdom, both kingdoms, and basically what happens when we switch sides, when we stop walking for the kingdom of darkness and we accept Christ and start working and walking with Christ in his kingdom. And I love how we started out talking about servanthood, because there are several different words that you'll hear and read in the Bible that describe our relationship with God. And the three that I wanted to highlight is we've got servant, father, and friend. And it's like, From the concept of us switching sides, if someone just defected to your kingdom, would you consider them a son or a friend right off the bat?
I would.
Probably not.
Yeah.
And it's not to say that they aren't worth or worthy of trust, but the reality is, if you've spent the entirety of your life in a kingdom that does things a certain way that are completely contrary to your kingdom, you're probably going to have to do a lot of teaching and explaining.
Yeah.
And I love the story of the Exodus, because that is basically what you see there. Like we have always talked about these concepts of, and Bema goes into this very, very well, the concept of empire and shalom, and empire Egypt being like Satan's kingdom, and God wanting shalom for us, and him taking them out of that environment, but also being put in the middle of a desert. It's like, okay, now I'm going to take care of your food and everything you need, and I'm going to supply everything you need so that you can learn how to serve me and my kingdom, so that I can therefore later on take you to the place that I promised your forefathers. It's like, but right now you are defectors of an empire that you were never supposed to belong to. So I've got to unlearn everything from you. And I was just thinking about my own walk with Jesus, and like the last 3 years have been in that desert place where it's just, I've basically taken care of the basics, but having to relearn everything. And then going into fatherhood, like what is the role of a parent is the question that I've been asking. And one of the best quotes I've ever heard was the job of a parent is to run out of jobs. It's like you wipe your child's butt till they can wipe their own, you feed them till they can feed themselves. It's the same thing. At some point, and at the same time, like most good parents will tell you, you can't be friends with your children because there's going to be times when you're going to need to be their bad guy for their own sake.
Right.
And you see that also in the way that he disciplines his children. So getting to that point where, as a father, that part of walking out that relationship is God showing us, okay, you're in a new kingdom. This is the way I do things. You are also my son, so I'm going to have to discipline you and show you the ropes and show you everything that I find pleasing, and give you a heart so that you'll want to do things that I find pleasing. But then getting to that point of looking at the friendship part is that the maturity level. It's like, okay, I've taught you everything that you need to know. I'm still here. But you have matured to the point where I expect you to use the authority that I have given you and to go out and do what I've asked you to do.
Right.
And at that point, like my relationship with my own father at this point in my late 30s, it like he's not there to punish me or like bend me over the knee and spank me anymore, because he's already done all that to get me to this point. Right. He's just there, and my relationship with my dad is more of a friendship now, where we just sit, talk about things, and yes, I still go to him because I need advice and I want the benefit of his experience.
Right. And I think we touched on that a little bit when we talked about the freedom that comes with being servants of God. When we talked about God is God and I'm not. In those earlier things we talked about, there's a freedom that comes with following God. But that freedom doesn't come from following a list of rules. Like God wants us to live a good life. And he wants to tell us that won't lead to a good life. This leads to a good life.
Mm-hmm.
Over and over and over again. It's like
Alone.
every father wants his children to live a good life. And every father should discipline the children when they are heading towards the wrong thing. Like Satan wants us to believe I'm going to have a good life if I get everything I want.
Mm.
Right? Like you said, love has boundaries. Right?
Yes.
Satan wants us to believe there are no boundaries.
Love does not have boundaries.
Because we get mad when we see a boundary because we think we're not free if there's a boundary. Right? Because Satan wants us to believe that boundaries are not freedom. Right? Right? So,
percent.
So, yeah, it's that father thing. Like God wants us to live our life the way we want to live our life, but he wants us to have a good life, and he knows how that would normally play out. And he knows
he designed how that should look.
Creators. It all goes back. Absolutely. So I think we've kind of wrapped this one up. And I think next time we need to explore those relationships when we start talking about salvation. Go ahead.
No, that's good. We're going to go into salvation and look at some of the differences between how it is understood in Hebrew culture with the Old Testament and the prophets versus how we look at it in the New Testament. Because as you and I have discussed and have been researching, there is quite a bit more of a difference than we are led to believe.
Right. And I feel that in the same way that I used to think that the fall of man was just that. It had everything to do with sin and pretty much nothing else. But it had everything to do with everything. In the same way, salvation has everything to do with everything. It's so far more involving and complex than just God paid the price. Like, all right, like Jesus paid the price, judgment was satisfied, done. It's way more than that. So much more.
Way more than we'll probably know on this side of heaven.
Yeah. But it's going to be fun to go into that. And then after that, who knows where we're going to go? It's going to go crazy after that. I guess we're just going to like ramble around. Maybe people should make some suggestions. I've already heard one suggestion by Terry Crisp. He talked to me on the phone and he says, "You should talk about this one." And I'm like, I don't think I can. Never heard that question before. That's a really good question. So I don't want to bring it up here because I'll get too many people going, yeah, let's talk about that one. And Jamie don't know. There's so much I don't know.
And that's okay. Thank you for joining us. We will see you next week.
See you next week.